Hello and welcome back to part 3 of my audiobooks How to Read More series. Part 1, I talked about how to get into reading via audio. Part 2, I talked about where you can find audiobooks. And part 3, which is this video right here, I'm going to be talking to you about how you can maximise your reading time using audiobook reading. So a question that a lot of us on BookTube get asked on a pretty regular basis by just anyone really is, how do you read so much? I get asked this by people at work, by people at roller skating class, just all walks of life. Whenever I mention to anybody how much I read, I am constantly asked, how do I read so much? And honestly, the answer is audiobooks. I am a very slow physical reader. I sub-vocalize. I spend a lot of time reading each word in the book. My eyes dart around, and particularly I read ahead in the dialogue. So physically reading is a much slower process for me than reading via audiobook, and that's particularly so because I have managed to increase my reading speed on audio to 2.5 times speed. So if you want to know how to go about bumping your speed up and increasing the speed at which you can read, you should go back and check out my first video in this series, which I will link up above for you. And similarly, if you want to know where to find audiobooks, then I will have video 2 in the series linked in the description as well. But this is in particular tips and tricks for maximising the amount of time during your day that you spend reading. Naturally, if you're reading at 2.5 times speed, then you're going to be reading more than if you're reading at 1 time speed. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with reading at 1 time speed, or 1.25, 1.5, 0.8, whatever speed it is that is comfortable for you to read at. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. You read at a pace that feels right to you. This video more so is about how to fit reading into more parts of your day. So I have a few tips for this. Firstly, I recommend having access to your audiobooks on your phone if you can, because for the most part people are going to have their phone with them wherever they are. So that's part 1, is always have your phone with you, and part 2 is always have headphones or something that you can use to actually listen to your audiobooks. You can just play your audiobook through the speaker on your phone. I do that sometimes, but not super often. I will either be using headphones or a portable speaker or something like that. So if you're out and about, make sure you have your phone and some headphones with you at all times. And then just start to incorporate listening to audiobooks whenever you can during your day. So for example, whilst you're doing boring or menial tasks like laundry, washing up, folding your clothes, tidying your living room, or when you're doing mindless tasks like walking somewhere or taking a train, or washing your face, cleaning your teeth, having a shower. All of these kinds of things that we just sort of do on autopilot because we've done them so many times before. Usually, I'm not talking about if you're, going to a place for the first time ever and you're trying to use a map to navigate your way, but if you're doing a journey that you've done every day for the past several years, then you don't really need to concentrate too much on what you're doing. You know what you're doing. You're doing it on autopilot, and probably most of the time your mind is wandering because you're listening to music, probably. You could be listening to an audiobook instead. When you are washing up, you can't be using your hands to turn the pages of a book, but you can listen to an audiobook. There's so many tasks like that we do throughout our day, and you might think to yourself, well, it's not really worth it to listen to an audiobook for the 10 minutes it's going to take me to walk to this place or the other place. But especially if you're reading at a higher speed, and even if you're not, 10 minutes could be a chapter. It could be 2 chapters if it's a book with short chapters. It could be half a chapter if it's a book with longer chapters. And all these moments, they add up over time. And this is something that you will also learn to do when you're learning to absorb stories via audio, is there's not so much noticeable separation between one chapter and another, and you will start to realise that you retain the story just fine if you finish in the middle of a chapter, because it's not so easy to notice with an audiobook when it is that you're ending in the middle of a chapter, as opposed to when you can clearly see in a book when you come to the end of that particular chapter. So what you want to be doing, if you want to be increasing the amount of time you're spending reading, is just to incorporate it into more parts of your day. If you don't need to be concentrating on something or reading something for work, or, you know, if you don't need to actively be concentrating on whatever it is that you're doing, then you could incorporate an audiobook while you do that. And don't allow it to rule your life. So don't think, oh, I'm having a quiet moment now, so I must read. But have it there as an option. So always have an audiobook that is in your currently reading pile, if you have one. And always have a way to be listening to an audiobook with you, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. And that's why I suggest having them on your phone, because that's just the easiest way that you're going to have audiobooks available to you for the most amount of time. And if you've got headphones with you, then great. If you're at home, you can put them on your speaker system or whatever you have. That's a really great way to start incorporating audiobooks into more parts of your day. You can also incorporate them into sort of calming activities that you're doing for yourself, so taking a bath, doing some colouring in or some knitting. You can be listening to an audiobook while you do that. I find that particularly helpful because otherwise the activity becomes less calming to me, because my mind will start to wander off, and I'm an anxious person, so naturally I'll start to overthink things. Usually I'll start to think about things I need to do, and then I'm just not calm anymore. So if I am listening to an audiobook whilst doing these calming activities, then they remain calming activities, and I'm also reading my book and progressing in my story. Another tip to make sure that you remain engaged with audiobook listening when you're adding it into so many more facets of your life is to make sure that you are varying your genre, your age range, your narrator. You don't want to be necessarily listening to the same genre, age range, narrator back to back to back to back to back, because it's going to become monotonous and you're going to get bored. So I do like to binge read some series. I have a video all about that, which I will link for you, but I wouldn't necessarily, well, I would binge read the Stormlight Archive on audio, and I have, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that if you're just starting out, unless it's your favourite series, in which case go for it, it's fantastic. But I wouldn't say whilst you're getting used to binge reading on audio that you binge read a whole big fat epic fantasy series, because that might just become a little bit overwhelming. So try to vary things up a bit, and hopefully what you'll find is that by using audio to incorporate reading into moments of your life that you otherwise wouldn't be able to read during, but you're not doing anything else. It's not like you're socializing with someone or trying to concentrate on a task of some kind. It's just sort of empty space. By incorporating reading into those moments, you will find that you end up naturally reading more because you're spending more of your time reading. And again, as I mentioned in part 1, you'll also increase the amount of reading you're doing by increasing the speed at which you are listening to audiobooks. So in March, I think I was reading on average a book every other day. So I read 14 books in the month of March, which has 31 days in it. So I was reading roughly a book every 2 days. I would never be able to read that much if I didn't listen to audiobooks. It just would not happen. I'm reading faster because I'm reading at 2.5 speed, and I'm also reading more because I'm incorporating reading in parts of my day when otherwise I would not be able to read, but I might actually want to be reading. So those are my tips for maximising the amount of time that you spend reading and therefore increasing the number of books that you want to read. Now, this is not to say that you need to do any of this stuff. This is just for people that want to be reading more than they currently feel like they're able to. These are some tips that you could incorporate into your lives that might help you feel like you're doing that more reading that you really want to be doing. And I will be back with part 4, which is going to be some recommendations of audiobooks that you could try listening to. And I'll break that down into categories for beginners and more advanced audiobook readers. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.